Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where you know the deal. People think they can do what they want, when they want, because they're special. And in today's episode, we've got road-raging Karens, greedy family members, entitled renters. Guys, this one will leave you shaking your heads so hard. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so I'm a semi-driver by trade, and I see a lot of stupidity on the roads, but this one still takes the cake. So last fall, I was on a pretty busy road, making a left turn into a small 2-lane industrial park. It's a very standard move and a part of my regular route. I've made this turn here about 50 or 60 times before. With the available turning space and the length of my truck, the end of my trailer drags through the oncoming lane for a few feet. And I do want to note, it's very common on smaller roads and it's not a big deal. I just wait till the space is clear, and if anyone approaches while I'm turning, they yield until I'm through the turn. This happens 20 times a day. But not today though. Today, the world's most important man is on the road, and he'll stop for nothing. The laws of the road and physics be damned. So halfway through my turn, Captain Idiot comes flying up the road. He then screeches to a halt and lays on his horn. Now, I can see that if I keep going through my turn, I'll crush his car like a beer can with my trailer, so I stop mid-turn. Meanwhile, the guy's honking madly, and I can see him screaming through his windshield. And I'm thinking, whatever. At this point, I'm wedged in place. If I go forward, I'll hit the guy. If I go backward, I'll be blind backing onto a busy road, and I would not do that for a winning lottery ticket. So all that's left to do is set my air brakes and wait for the lead-caked synapses in this guy's brain to figure things out. But fat chance. After a solid 15 seconds of laying on the horn, the guy puts his car in park and he gets out storming up to my window. The guy's fat face is the color of a tomato, and he starts doing that thing of disapproval where they shake their finger at you. And being the a-hole I am, I just smile and wave at him, which pisses him off even more. The guy then climbs up the steps of my truck and he starts opening the door. He then knocks on the window when he figures out it's locked. I just roll the window halfway down and I put on my good old customer service voice. I ask him, "Can I help you, sir?" The guy screams at me and says, "You are in my way. You need to move right now." At that I tell him, "Sir, I can't go forwards or backwards without hitting you or another car. If you would just back up a few feet, I'll be able to clear your car and be out of your way." But the guy, of course, is not budging. He says to me, "I'm not going to move. You're in my way. You are obstructing traffic." I then tell him, "Then we'll just sit here, I guess." I just pivot in my seat, throw my feet up on the console, and pull out my phone. At this point, I'm blocking both lanes of traffic on this small road, and cars are backing up on the larger road to turn in. The guy screams at me once again and says, "You're obstructing traffic and endangering people. I'm calling the police and they'll come arrest you." I just tell him, "You go and do that." I then roll my window up without looking up from my phone. The guy stalks back to his car, gets in, and starts yelling into his phone. As he's yelling at what I can only assume is some poor 911 operator not getting paid enough, I see a police officer coming up from behind my truck, and she starts walking towards my cab. The officer looks around and then clocks the angry old guy on the phone and where he's parked. And she climbs up on my steps and she asked, "Did you hit his car?" I say, "No, ma'am." She then says, "Is he refusing to back up?" I tell her, "Yes, ma'am." She then sighs and says, "Sit tight." She then walks back and taps on his window. The guy gets out of the car, gesturing at me and yelling at her. I can't hear what they're saying, but he's obviously getting angrier, and I'm starting to wonder if he'll have a stroke before he can move his car. By this point, 2 other officers have joined the conversation, and one of them starts leaning over the guy and gesturing towards my truck. The guy then gets back into his car, slams the door, backs up, and as I pass by, he gets back out of his car and he starts looking at the ground as one of the officers pulls out a notepad. I come to find out from my friends working in the industrial park that that guy's known as a nuisance in the area, and this was evidently the last straw for the cops. who hear from him about petty concerns every few days. They confirmed that he was hit with tickets for obstructing traffic, aggressive driving, and failure to yield. And the cherry on top was that his Back the Blue bumper sticker did not help one bit. My frickin' goodness, guys, talk about making a mountain out of a molehill, right? Like, how hard is it to just back the heck up a few feet, sir, and let the semi-truck complete their turn? Like, I just don't get it. I really don't. But some people would rather escalate things to extremes rather than cooperate with somebody. And seriously, thank goodness the guy got ticketed for all the BS he was pulling, and hopefully he'll think twice about trying to pull something like this again. Some people are absolutely ridiculous, aren't they? So when I was around 6 years old, I lived with my family in a nice house in a small city in Poland. It was a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts, and pretty much all the neighbors knew each other. Another thing is, there were no sidewalks around the part of the street I lived at. There was only one crappy sidewalk that started on the other side, in front of my neighbor's house. It's important to remember that the sidewalk was very old and in very bad shape, and still to this day, people are asking the city to fix it. So this story is about that neighbor, Karen. Karen was an older lady. Everyone suspected that she really didn't have anything better to do than to gossip and disturb everyone, trying to rule the street. Everyone's always commenting that if you wanted to get the whole community to know something, all you had to do was tell Karen something and tell her to keep it a secret. With that said, whenever someone came to visit us, they usually parked their car in front of our property. But of course, on the bigger meetups, like barbecues or parties, people would park in front of our closest neighbors' houses too. And this was never a problem. No gates were obstructed and no one was disturbed. Well, almost. Karen hated when someone parked in front of her house. She would always run out yelling how we dared park our filthy cars on her precious sidewalk. Every time somebody would come to us and park their car there, the yelling would start. Until one time, my mom's friend Tomek came for coffee during winter. He's a local policeman and his specialty is road law. So my mom tells him about Karen and her behavior regarding the sidewalk. At that, Tomek just laughs, since that thing was in such bad shape it can barely be even called a sidewalk. When he was leaving, he assured my mom that he would stop by the next day for a coffee on his lunch break. So the next day comes by, and I was playing with my brother in the snow. We see this black car pulling over in front of Karen's house, and as the driver gets out, Karen storms out of her house and she starts yelling. She yells at the person, "You can't park here, this is my sidewalk. Get your filthy car off my..." Karen then stops mid-scream as she realizes it's Tomek in his full police uniform, hat and all, turning around towards Karen as comically as he could. He then says to her, "Excuse me? You're telling me I can't park my car here?" Karen stammers and says, "Yes." He then tells her, "But this is a sidewalk open to the public." Karen says, "Yeah, but it's my sidewalk." He then tells her, "So let me get this straight. This is your sidewalk?" Karen says yes. And he says, "And you're the one responsible for taking care of it?" Karen proudly says, "Well, yes, I am. That's why I don't allow anyone to park here." He then says to her, "Oh, that's so nice I found you. Now, since it's your sidewalk, you're responsible for clearing the snow from it to not create danger for people walking on it. And since it's not plowed, I need to write you a fine for endangering public safety." He says that as he's pulling out his notebook. Karen says to him, "But no other sidewalks are plowed." Tomek tells her, "Oh, it doesn't matter. The other sidewalks belong to the city, and the clearing crew is working on cleaning them. But since the sidewalk is yours, it's your responsibility." Karen says, "I'm too old, I can't shovel the snow." He then says to her, "Then you need to hire somebody to do that. Of course, if this sidewalk happened to be public property." It's at this point, Karen backtracks and says, "Yeah, actually, it's not mine." Tomek says to her, "But a moment ago, you were yelling at me that it was. So what is it? Is it yours or not? Because I don't know if I should fine you now." Karen tells him it's not mine. He then says to her, "All right, seems like we cleared this up. Now, if you ever harass anyone like you did with me, it will result in a fine. So I recommend you watch out on what you claim to be yours." And with that, Karen never disturbed anyone for parking in front of her house again. She would only stare at people, trying to burn holes in their skulls with her sight. Now that was super satisfying, guys, and honestly, I can't imagine a better way for a Karen to have learned that lesson. Like her coming barreling out of her house, screaming at someone, only to realize they were an officer in uniform was freaking awesome. And another thing to add, guys, is keep in mind that OP lives in Poland, where sidewalks in front of homes are taken care of by the city, and you're also allowed to park on them as long as you leave space for pedestrians. I just learned that. So my wife's Aunt Louise is a great lady. She and her husband lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they bought their home in the late 1970s. After her husband passed, she sold her home for well over $1 million, and she moved back to live closer to her family where she grew up. She also lives very frugally, so she doesn't have to worry about money. Aunt Louise had 3 kids who are all in their 40s and early 50s. The 2 oldest are nice, normal people, but her youngest, Kay, is a real piece of work. She meets all the criteria for a psychological diagnosis of narcissism. Anyways, Aunt Louise just turned 70, and she's really happy about it, and decided to celebrate. She's a very kind and giving person, and celebrating to her means doing something nice for others. Aunt Louise has 3 kids, 14 nieces and nephews, and 40 plus grandnieces and grandnephews. Now, I don't know how much she sent to everyone, but based on what she sent to my wife, her niece, and knowing how much she liked to be fair, the nieces and nephews each received a check for $1,000. And based on what she sent to our kids, I suspect each grandniece and grandnephew received a check for $500. There was also a very kind and personalized note to each person, saying how much she loved them and imploring them to do something fun with this money. Don't pay bills with it. It was generous and sweet, and when a couple of the kids came by this weekend for a barbecue, we talked about Aunt Louise, their plans for the money, and as I suspect was Aunt Louise's intent, we had happy conversations about fun plans. And then the email came. For some background, Aunt Louise's daughter Kay audits her mom's finances so thoroughly that it would make the IRS blush. Last Christmas, she berated her mom for vacationing to New York City with a friend, as it was a waste of money. She's also frequently talked about plans for her inheritance, with her still very much alive mother sitting right next to her. In short, she's only thinking about herself and the money she'll get when mom dies. Kay had sent my wife and others an email claiming that her mother is suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's with a request. More on that below. While we suspected that this was Kay being Kay, my wife still called Aunt Louise, just in case. All of this was news to Aunt Louise, who was lucid as always. And here's the best part. In the email, Kay asked everybody to send the money they received from Aunt Louise to her, rather than Aunt Louise. Kay nobly volunteered to handle all the deposits herself, to avoid it being a burden on poor Aunt Louise. One thing to add though, in light of the times that Kay has actually helped herself to Aunt Louise's money without permission, aka stealing, I'm fairly convinced that not a dime would make it back to Aunt Louise. Yeah, the post ends right there, guys, but I totally agree. Like, if the family members sent back the money they received to Kay, there's a good chance it won't make it back to Aunt Louise at all because Kay feels it's her money to begin with. Like, Kay clearly is the typical greedy family member who only cares about herself and is waiting on mom's death for a payday, as sad as that is. I just hope Aunt Louise has a plan for her money after she passes that doesn't involve Kay at all, because greedy people like Kay deserve absolutely nothing. And guys, if you think that one was wild, listen to this next one. A few years ago, my boyfriend's mom died suddenly and nobody was prepared. He was devastated and he could barely function. He called me and asked me to come over and help him with funeral preparations. He and his dad had to go buy a coffin and all the other things necessary for a funeral. At the same time, they expected a visit from their relatives from another city. So I came over and he and his dad went to buy the stuff they needed. I just remained in their house, cleaning around and prepping a meal for the relatives who were expected to arrive the next day. At one moment, somebody rang the door. I opened it and I saw my boyfriend's aunt and uncle, sister and brother-in-law of the deceased. Now, I didn't even have time to say my condolences. As soon as the aunt saw me, she starts yelling at me saying, "Who the F are you and what the hell are you doing here?" I told her that I was there to help my boyfriend and his father around the house with funeral preparations. Now, the thing is, she knew me. She knew who I was, but obviously she pretended to not know who I was. She then told me to get out of the house. I didn't want to make any waves, so I went out. I sat on the porch and had a few smokes. 30 or 45 minutes later, the aunt and uncle came out of the house, carrying some huge bags and boxes in their hands. They came empty-handed, to make things clear. I immediately realized that they were nothing but vultures, but I decided to keep things as civil as possible for the sake of my boyfriend, his dad, and his deceased mom. I told them that they should wait for my boyfriend and his dad to come back home. I was politely as possible in that awkward moment. I even said it would mean a lot to them if they could see you in this horrible moment. But the sister of the deceased starts yelling at me again and says, "Who the F do you think you are? This is my sister's house." Again, I took a deep breath and I replied as calmly as I could, "Yes, I know, but this is also my boyfriend's and his dad's house, and until they're back, I'm responsible for everything that happens here in their absence." She then kept yelling and fuming. I tried to reason with her husband and I told him, imagine my situation, like when they're back, they would think it's me who took these things. So please, wait for their return. But the harpy wouldn't shut up or let him speak. She kept screaming and yelling, throwing all kinds of insults and threats to my face. Now, I'm not a person who remains calm or silent in these situations, but I wasn't on my territory, and the woman I knew and loved had just passed away and I didn't want to bicker with her sister. I just really wanted to calm the situation down before my boyfriend and his dad returned. They were both devastated, and this was the last thing that they should see or hear. So I just let her scream at me, but I remained adamant. I told her, I will not let you leave with these things until the two of them return. I'm not going to be accused of stealing, and this is definitely the best for all of us. Please calm down and wait for their return. They should be back any minute now. Luckily, I'm a tall woman and tough. I'm a former volleyball player and swimmer. I'm 6 feet tall, and I was standing between them and a stairwell that led down to the front yard. So she couldn't get down from the porch. All she could do was keep yelling at me. That's when two neighbors next door heard her screaming, and they came to see what was going on. I was at the verge of exploding at this point, calling the cops or even my boyfriend. But luckily, the neighbors came and they asked what's going on. The aunt then screamingly explains to them that a stranger would not let her leave, that the deceased was her sister, and so on. This bought me some time, and eventually my boyfriend and his dad returned home, and they found us all bickering at their porch. The aunt and uncle had to leave all their stuff behind and go home empty-handed. I had a splitting headache, and I can't even imagine how my boyfriend and his dad felt. Later, we looked at the contents of the bags and boxes they were trying to take away. All of the most valuable items from the house were packed there, including my expensive laptop that I brought to work while there. The box also contained jewelry that his father inherited from his mom and grandmother, also an expensive camera and the deceased woman's very expensive iPhone, her clothes, and other valuable items. And here's the kicker. The aunt and uncle did not show up to the funeral. I promise you, if they had shown up, I would have barked at them and chased them away. I was furious. I don't remember me being that furious as I was that day. Like, how in the world could somebody be such a vulture? It was her sister. I think I felt more sorry for the loss of that woman than her sister was. Again, some people are just horrible people, aren't they? Like, imagine not even caring about your own sister's funeral, and upon hearing about her death, just basically wants everything she owns. Like, ain't that some sad BS? And guys, I guess it's common because this isn't the first time I've read or heard of something like this happening. And honestly, if I were in OP's shoes, I would have just let them go and gotten the cops involved. Like, that is some next level entitlement, isn't it? Like, I could never fathom just showing up to anyone's home like that and just being like, oh, this is mine now, this is mine, oh, that's a lovely purse, she doesn't need it anymore, that's mine too. And again, like I've said, this happens so often. This person comments, this happened to us after my grandparents on my stepdad's side of the family died. While we were at the funeral, a few other family members came by the house, took a bunch of furniture and items without permission. And this person comments, when my grandfather died, his brother rifled through grandpa's tools and garage while everybody else was at the funeral. He did the same thing 5 years later when great-grandma died. So yeah, some people are just really, really crappy people. Okay, so this brain rot and entitlement is insane. So for some context, I'm in my 30s and I live way below my means. 90% of my income gets invested in my rental businesses. I have an employee who manages my properties day to day, so I don't actually meet many tenants face to face. I also love home improvement, so when I have free time, I do my own repairs and upgrades. It saves me tremendous money. So on this day, I'm at an 8-unit apartment I own and I'm repointing the brick siding. I arrived around 6 a.m. on a Saturday and I worked for 5 hours, so now I'm sitting down and eating lunch. I'm just scrolling my phone while taking a short break. This is when my 72-year-old tenant named Martin walks by. Now, Martin has never met me before because my employee leased him, but I know all about Martin. I know his income, his lease terms, how he calls the property manager yelling because he accidentally unplugs his appliances, etc. Martin just says to me, "Sitting down on the job, eh?" Giving me a smug look. I say to him, "Yeah, I'm just taking a small break before getting back to it." He then says to me, "You know what? This is what's wrong with your generation. You have no work ethic. You always need to rest. Like, what do they even pay you for?" Hearing that, I'm appalled. I say, "Excuse me? I've been here working since 6 a.m. fixing this wall, and I'm taking a short break, dude. Please leave me alone." He just replies, "You're sitting down, you're not working. No work ethic. I bet you're getting paid right now too. That's why your generation owns nothing. That's why you can't even afford to buy your first house. Blah, blah, blah." Now, I had to sit quietly for a second to process what I just heard. And it absolutely pissed me off since I've been doing masonry work for hours on my building that Martin rents from me. So I say to him, "Actually, Martin, my name's John. Not my real name. And you should go back to your apartment in 104D and reread your lease, because then you'll realize that I'm the owner. I do my own maintenance sometimes, and I've been doing maintenance here for 5 hours. My employee Kevin is the one who leased you. And come to think of it, your lease is up in March, isn't it? You can expect a non-renewal." At this, Martin's absolutely short-circuited. The guy goes complete silent for 15 seconds as he gets redder and redder with anger. He then yells at me that I'm a lazy liar and he'll tell the property manager that I'm sitting down on the clock. He then waddles off yelling that he'll call the cops because I'm harassing him and trespassing. On Monday, Kevin, my employee, texted me, saying that Martin sent him an email complaining about the lazy worker who insulted him. I instructed Kevin to not renew Martin's lease in the spring. Force him to move. F you, Martin. You know, sometimes people really need to keep their mouths shut. Like, Martin had no business even saying anything to OP. Like, seriously, some people need frickin' hobbies or something. And guys, I love the fact that Martin, the renter, was commenting that people don't own properties nowadays because they're lazy. What does that make him then? So I just came across this sub, and it seems like the perfect place to rant about this incident that still makes my blood boil to this day. So back in high school, my friend group included this one guy who had a terminal illness. He was at the point where his doctors were shocked he was still alive. Aside from being skinny and a bit pale, the guy looked like any other average teenager. He had his good and bad days, but even on his good days, he would tire easily. He also didn't talk much about his illness, and he tried to be normal like everyone else. For example, he would talk about the college he wanted to attend and what career he wanted, and we all respected that he never brought up his illness. He also had a placard, so we would always park in handicapped spots. And as you can imagine, we often got dirty looks when a bunch of seemingly healthy teenagers just piled out of the car. Our friend just ignored the looks, so we never said anything to those judgmental people. One weekend, we all decided to go to the amusement park. After an hour or so, he starts getting tired, so we got him one of those loaner wheelchairs. Like the teenagers we were, we all took turns doing stuff like pushing him really fast and doing wheelies, but we were careful not to bother anyone else. I remember him laughing his ass off. And that is until a Karen shouts at us from like 30 feet away. She screams and says, "You know you're keeping that wheelchair from someone who actually might need it, don't you?" I just looked at my friend and his smile instantly disappeared. I was done. I was effing done. So I marched over to her, knowing exactly what I was going to say. After biting my tongue so many times, I didn't raise my voice so my friend wouldn't hear what I said. I just said to her, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm sure you'll be happy to know that my friend has a terminal illness, and his doctors say he could die any moment now. So someone else will be able to use this wheelchair very soon." At that, she gets all red in the face and she says, "Well, how was I supposed to know that?" I replied, "You weren't, because it's none of your effing business. So thank you for reminding my friend he's dying when he was having so much fun." The look on her face was priceless. I just turned around and walked back to my friends. He made it another 2 years after that, and Jay, I still miss you, bro. You know what, I gotta say I admire OP for what they did. Like, it must have taken a lot to not yell at that Karen who had absolutely no clue about anything. I can totally imagine the look on her face, and I bet she's never felt so dumb and embarrassed. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/EntitledPeople. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/EntitledPeople episode, another one, where a smug Karen thinks OP's nothing but a loser janitor, and it backfires so hard on her. Guys, it's such a wild story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.